Hollywood is getting very, very nervous about AI-generated video content, and to be fair, they're pretty much right to be. As with the release of Seedance, ByteDance's recent V2 version of their own video-generating AI, well, frankly, we've kind of arrived at the point where the usual visual cues of determining what is and is not AI are all but eradicated. It's no longer enough to simply, count the fingers on a hand to figure it out. Visually speaking, you've got to go in pretty deep detail to really find the problems now with the latest generation of AI video. And worse still is, of course, the fact that this is a major Chinese company doing this, which also makes it very difficult to enforce copyright on the things being produced. And, well, this might not be a real problem were we still in the 2004s or 5s, when these companies were producing what we wanted them to do. Obviously, everyone would choose the original product over the Chinese knockoff. Duh, that's just common sense. But in this day and age, when the companies are no longer producing what the audience wants to see, well, suddenly Nicolas Cage's Superman becomes a hell of a lot more appealing every day that goes by. And again, whilst you can still see some obvious little hinkles and dinkles and problems here and there, like him flying through a door indoors, for example, or explosions coming up from random directions, etc., but all of these are minor errors that can obviously be fixed, both in editing or generating new clips, and all things like this. These are already errors that you see several times in just regular Hollywood productions, like Game of Thrones, forgetting a Starbucks coffee cup on the table mid-feast, for example. Errors like these are not deal breakers by any extent of the imagination whatsoever anymore. And this is in large part why Disney has now launched a cease-and-desist against ByteDance, the owners of Seedance. This was also followed by Paramount as well, arguing that the company is infringing upon their copyright, with well-known characters and actors appearing. SAG-AFTRA too has claimed that this is obviously blatant infringement upon their rights and their own contracts with the various actors involved, as the argument then obviously becomes that if the AI model is capable of replicating these things, be it Superman or Wolverine or whatever the hell else, or even famous actors or character movies like Sam here, for example, that all of this information must be somewhere in the training data worked into Seedance. Now, proving this is a pinch more difficult, as the court system hasn't really caught up to AI yet, and how it's really trained and on what and how it is trained. Now, the reason why this is interesting when it comes to China, though, is that you might not think it, but China is actually a bit of a copyright haven, as it is one of the places on Earth where copyright is enforced the fastest and most stringent, even indeed allowing companies to bypass the usual judicial processes to get your copyright protected by going directly to the state, which might intervene on your behalf, which goes a hell of a lot faster and with a hell of a lot heavier of a hand than anything you can see in the West. However, this of course is entirely dependent on the state's willingness to intervene. See, that's the big kicker here. When China is on your side, when they want Western money to come into the Chinese market, when they want access to things like Western IPs, and they have already gotten their hands on a few, they are very, very cooperative, in the ways that only a de facto dictatorship could ever possibly be, and in the past they have been very cooperative too with companies like Disney. But this cooperation, of course, only extends up until the point where it is beneficial to China to engage in it. And the question now is, are we past that point? Make no mistake, as we've talked about on multiple previous occasions, China is gearing up to try and become the world hegemon. It understands that it probably cannot do so militarily, because America is still far, far ahead of it in that terms, and probably will be for another 50 years, and that's assuming the US doesn't simply just pick up its own military production to match anything China does, but culturally, there might be an opening. For the last 80-odd years, America has been the world's undisputed cultural hegemon because it has been able to produce all of our entertainment. And for the longest time as well, see, here's the thing, right? If we lived in 2005, etc., then none of this would really be a problem. Nobody would choose the Chinese knockoff of Superman over the actual Superman. And when we were getting Superman, when we were getting the Superman we wanted, more correctly, we were getting Batman the Animated Series and Young Justice and all of this good stuff, we wouldn't choose the knockoff for the world. In fact, platforms like Steam have proven again and again that Western consumers, gamers, and entertainment freaks like myself, we tend to be very, 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 very loyal towards the companies that actually treat us well, to the point of almost complete exclusion of any other company, regardless of how much they offer us, like Epic Games, for example. However, these companies haven't been giving us what we want. We haven't been getting Superman. We haven't been getting Disney movies in the style we want. And so, as China has begun to realize more and more that it does not actually require the copyrighted systems and characters of the West anymore to be successful, as seen with Black Myth Wukong, it is becoming more and more eager to try and compete with the West on a more level playing field, both by producing its own entertainment, of course, as in the aforementioned example of Black Myth Wukong, and an ever-increasing number of Chinese-produced manga equivalents or animes, and they are also beginning to realize that, well, we can actually make these things. And it's not like the West can really stop us anymore. We can argue, we can obfuscate, we can complain, and we can make all kinds of excuses for why making Superman with an AI-generated Chinese engine isn't actually copyright infringement. And any such claims can be bogged down in Chinese courts for decades upon decades, or even simply just ignored and not enforced, whilst the Chinese government hands out platitudes. And if the various companies try to take the Chinese companies to court in the US, as they technically can, as the products will almost certainly be available in America, well, they simply won't show up. What then is the US courts going to do? Try to censor the entirety of the internet from gaining access to it? Of course not. If this stuff becomes popular enough, Western consumers will, as demonstrated with the Japanese manga and anime market, simply flood to the source instead. And hey, all of that is ignoring the obvious benefits of being the primary producers of entertainment that people actually want to watch. That is the power that America has been able to exert upon the world, that of the cultural hegemon. The majority of modern day culture, our version of the old classics, they are the superheroes. They are the larger-than-life characters invented in American comic books. And they are also the reimagined fairy tales of Disney. There are practically nobody alive today that remembers the original Brother Grimm's fairy tales, but it'll be hard-pressed to find a kid who hasn't heard of the Disney version of them. The power up for grab here is obvious to anyone with the eyes to see, and I think maybe the entertainment companies have started to realize this as well. Worse still, companies like Disney are of course in the middle of their own pivots, as Disney too have realized that they need to start producing entertainment that people actually want to watch after the enormous disaster that was The Acolyte, and with A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms yet again hammering home the point for the umpteenth time that the audience will come if you actually just produce the entertainment they desire. Well, again, this is becoming a lesson so frighteningly obvious that even your average CEO can't possibly overlook it for long. And again, China already knows this. So it will be interesting to see how exactly this develops, as I imagine that even if it is not right now, we are rapidly approaching a point where China will simply say fuck it and start ignoring their various deals with major Western entertainment companies, as it no longer brings as much of a benefit to do so. They no longer require the West's IPs to make up for their own, in many cases definitely weaker cultural output. And if they do require our stuff, well, I could just simply steal it. And what are we going to do to stop them? Whine, complain, try to take them to court in our countries? Yeah, I don't know about that. I really don't know about that. Especially as, again, this technology will only grow better and better over time, too. Smoother, faster, and cheaper. And there's another point as well. The West's chip dominance, while still technologically superior to anything that China can produce, well, it's right next door to Taiwan, the world's largest chip producer, and whilst I'm absolutely sure they've mined every factory to go boom at the press of a button, I guarantee you that, there's only a question of time before China begins catching up in that regard as well. Not to mention, we've already sold China a lot of our old chip technology, and China, as the dictatorship it is, can simply demand that huge portions of its own development and industrial might be put towards producing chips. Whereas the RAM prices in Europe are skyrocketing across the West, in China, they're simply mass-producing chips that we've taken out of the market because they aren't quite up to snuff any longer. Chinese don't give a shit. If they can't do it with 2 RAM chips, they'll simply produce 8 of inferior quality and slop them into an ever larger computer mainframe. Until they can create this AI simply through brute forcing it. There we go. The West really needs to start taking some rather strident actions to maintain its position as the cultural hegemon, and soon. Otherwise, within 10-20 years, a frightening amount of our entertainment is going to be speaking Mandarin, and as somebody who finds that a deeply objectionable language, I don't want to see it happen. Do let me know in the comment section down below, by the way, what you think of all of this, and whether or not Disney are even worthy of protection anymore, as frankly, this point, if China was to simply give me another season of Batman the Animated Series of the same quality and better yet, dubbed with the original voices, generated by AI of course, I don't know. Yeah, I somehow feel like I'd have a hard time resisting. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.